All right, let's talk more about the classic on Friday night, where Texas edged out Texas Tech 2-1 in an ultimate incredible pitcher's duel. And the person that was part of the broadcast alongside Alex Loeb and knows a thing or two about striking people out and being involved in classic pitcher's duel, of course, the GOAT herself, Kat Osterman, here joining us. You've had some time here to think about that game on Friday night. What comes to your mind now that you have time to think about it?
First, as you mentioned, it was an old school pitcher's duel. I mean, you had strikeouts going on both sides. I really think, and I said at the very end, all eyes were obviously on NiJaree Canady and Texas Tech and what they would do facing Texas, who's number one. And I think a lot of the talk was not on the star of the show, which was Teagan Kavan. And, I think she thrives just not having to be the person that's always talked about. Even when you talk about Texas, let's be honest, you talk about Reese Atwood, and rightfully so. But I said at the end, all eyes were on Nyjah and what she would do against Texas. And if you were watching Texas, you were waiting to see what Reese would do. And Teagan just slipped in there and stole the spotlight. So it was a fun game to watch if you love watching good pitching, which, watching both pitchers adjust and how they pitched yesterday versus what they've done in the past was fun to see. Nyjah late in the game was working her curve a little bit. We saw her throw her changeup, and I really do believe she has another off-speed pitch. I don't want to say it's an off-speed rise because it doesn't really jump, but it mirrors a rise ball. So she was throwing an off-speed that looked a little different. And then, I mentioned again at the end, Teagan Kavan had a drop ball that she was mixing in, got some strikeouts and ground balls on it. And I think that's a game changer. I don't know that Teagan Kavan goes 9 strong innings if she doesn't have the drop ball this time around to showcase as opposed to just going all up spin.
So let's talk about both pitchers, and starting with Teagan, because you're right. She was the star, 18 strikeouts. No Texas pitcher has had that many strikeouts in a game since, well, you, which has World Series '06 against Arizona State. So you can relate to what she was doing last night. She, to me, looked like a different pitcher, a different level from last year, like a bona fide ace. You just mentioned why. She's added to her repertoire. We kind of forget she's just a sophomore.
She's young, but she definitely pitched like a veteran last night. And granted, she got plenty of experience last year as a freshman. Let's not overshadow that. But on top of adding the drop to her repertoire, you saw her control the strike zone last night and not get flustered by the fact that a Jerry Glasgow offense is going to make you work for your out. So even in the first inning, there were hitters having 6, 8 pitch at bats and fouling a lot of pitches off, and she didn't blink. She stayed with her game plan. She was going to force them to get pop ups, which she had a ton of until late in the game. Um, and she didn't get flustered by the fact the pitch count was getting higher or that they were just making contact with balls. She continued to stick to her game plan, stretched the zone beautifully. There were a couple times last year as a freshman that I was like, man, if she would just climb up over their head a couple times, I think she'd get some swing and misses. And she did that in control last night and got some swing and misses on balls way out of the zone that maybe she thinks aren't competitive. But when you have an aggressive offense like Jerry Glasgow's known to put out there, you have to do that from time to time. So the maturity of Teagan Kavan was definitely on show last night against Texas Tech.
And of course, Reese was catching her. And I love the story you told during the broadcast about the relationship you had with Megan Willis, how you two are opposites, but it worked on the field. And I had a chance to have Reese and Teagan on the podcast recently before the season started. I don't know if they're drastically different, but I could sense in talking to both of them, they feed off each other. Do you sense that in the two of them now playing together here with a pitcher-catcher relationship for a second year in a row?
I think you watch and with social media now you follow too and you see that they're almost two peas in a pod doing a lot of things together. They spent the summer together, they played in Canada together, they went on a hiking trip in Utah together. They've done a lot, and I think they understand that for Texas to go, the two of them have to be able to go and go together. And so don't get me wrong, I think they genuinely enjoy each other too.
Yeah,
Like
yeah,
they're
yeah.
friends, and they are definitely probably more alike than Megan and I were. But I think they have really bought into making sure that relationship is as strong as they can get it because they know when it comes down the stretch that if if they have that relationship, then they'll be able to battle through things. And it was on show last night too. There were a couple times Reese threw in wet balls. She walked the ball out to Teagan, and there's just conversation of what's going on, calming her down, keeping her going. I don't even think she needed to calm her down, more of just keep going. And I think, they do feed off each other. Reese, big outs, will pump her fists behind home plate. And I think we got a little bit more passion and emotion out of Teagan Kavan last night as well.
Yeah, no, it was fantastic to watch. You mentioned the elements. What's that like as a pitcher? It was kind of slick. It was kind of misty rain. I mean, you were there in person. At least that's what I saw in the broadcast. It looked like misty rain there. It rained at times, so it was a little wet. How much of it? And yet, I didn't sense that either pitcher was phased by it that much.
No, it was like a misty rain. It picked up a little bit where it actually probably could have been called a drizzle. I think the thing that couples with that is it was cold. So it was cold and damp, which is never fun to be playing in. And both pitchers being upspin pitchers and that are not affecting you is actually impressive because when the ball gets wet, it's a lot of times harder to stay under a ball and keep your ball rising without your fingers slipping off as opposed to drop balls. So both pitchers being able to still utilize their rise ball in those conditions was impressive. But I do think it was more drizzle than it was actually falling. So while, yes, the ball would get wet and plenty of balls got tossed to the side, probably a little bit easier to keep your hand dry since it's not coming down and you can keep your hand in your glove or different things to kind of keep your grip. But, I don't know. Neither pitcher used the elements as an excuse. I don't think the elements were a reason for either pitcher to give up runs or any situation. So both of them, a lot of poise in those conditions.
Let's take me through the pregame there. Did you expect to see the matchup, NiJaree versus Teagan there, or were you still kind of hesitant? To your credit, you told me you didn't think you would see possibly, obviously, the matchup everybody wanted to see in Clearwater there between Jordy Ball and NiJaree there. What was your impression going into this game in particular?
I expected to see that matchup on Friday night. If you don't throw NiJaree at night to Texas at home, I don't know what other advantage you think you're going to have. I mean, don't get me wrong, she can win on Sunday too, but night games, if you throw hard, it tends to look a little bit faster. Or at least that's what hitters tell me. I didn't throw fast enough for it to matter. But hard up in the zone, dark, and now it's misty rain that you're having to focus through too. I think it was a great matchup. I wasn't sure if Texas was going to start Teagan or sit Lolly Gutierrez. Both obviously had a number of innings last year. I think both put up numbers that if they hit the inning marks, they could possibly be All-Americans. So Texas really had the ability to go either way. But I think you give the ball to Teagan after what she did in the World Series last year. And so I wasn't surprised. But Jerry Glasgow had warned us too in our coach's interview that depending on what happened earlier in the day or a gut feeling, he could easily change his mind. So you always have to be ready for that. But he did go through three pitchers against UMass when NiJaree wasn't any one of those. That kind of clearly made it known that he was going to start her.
All right, speaking of NiJaree, you get to see her in person as a Red Raider for the first time. You've seen her pitch in person before. What was your thoughts seeing her live as a Red Raider? What jumped out to you there? She had her own great game, 11 strikeouts. It's a matchup we won't forget anytime soon. But what'd you think of her?
NiJaree was NiJaree. She used her rise ball. She was able to throw it in the zone. Texas took a lot of good strikes early, and then chased the balls out of the zone. And, normally it's kind of opposite. People are trying to, lay off the stuff out of the zone, attack in the zone. And so that just means it was deceptive out of her hand. She does use her changeup and off speed a little bit more than I felt like she did at Stanford. And I didn't see her throw a drop much last night. They said she's been working on it, but I did see her start to try to throw a curveball a little bit more, especially later in the game. And so you can tell she's trying to evolve into more of just a rise ball pitcher. And Jerry Glasgow told us that in the pregame call was that, she spent some time with the national team this past summer and realized she can't just throw rise balls. And so she wanted to enhance her game, and you could see that coming. I think there were a few times where I was shocked they went with an alternate pitch as opposed to a rise ball. But at the same time, at some point, you have to test it. And but she's the heart. She's going to be the heartbeat of that team. And so every time she gets a big strikeout, you get the patented NiJaree fist pump, bent knees, excitement. Jump up and down if it's the third strike, and she still showed the same composure she always has. A number of times Texas has runners on, first inning especially, both teams had runners on, and both pitchers were able to stay calm and keep their team scoreless. So, I think we saw NiJaree. We saw what we're going to get out of NiJaree. NiJaree was NiJaree as expected, and just unfortunate. You go 9 innings and somewhere someone's going to blink.
Yeah, with a goofy ending where the ball hits a runner in the ninth. I don't think we've ever seen that before. That was wild.
Yeah, that was the craziest ending I think I've ever seen.
What do you make of NiJaree also getting some at bats in there? It was kind of weird how they would bring her in, but then take her out and bring her in as an at bat. I know Jerry's still there's a work in progress there, but that is a goal. And I know Alex mentioned it on the broadcast. That is a goal of hers, is to be a two-way player. What did you think of her swings in live action?
I think, Nyjah's a great athlete, and I got to coach against her last summer before going to Stanford, actually, and she hit for herself, and she was a very good hitter. We had to be smart on how we pitched to her as well, and so Jerry Glasgow is going to do a great job with her. And I think she can pitch and hit in the same game. Don't get me wrong. It's going to be interesting to see offensively what she does as she faces elite pitching more consistently. Obviously we saw her get some hits off of Jordy Ball, but Teagan Kavan's an elite pitcher as well. They're going to face Oklahoma State. They're going to face Baylor. So as you get elite pitching, how is she going to adjust? Is she going to be able to still be in your four hole? But last night I don't think she would ever say that was a great offensive game for her. She struck out twice and walked once, but Jerry manipulated the lineup, which he had to do, to be honest. You need to have somebody who can run for her if she gets on so you don't get her injured. And then at the same time, defensively, he had to be able to put some people in left field. That's kind of the spot that he used to rotate some players in. So, and the person who actually filled in or originally was listed as DP Holloman, she ended up getting a base hit and scored their run. So, you tip your hat. Everyone wants to say he's crazy, but his craziness pays off. So he put her in, she got a slap and ended up scoring the first run of the game.
Yeah, Holloman's one of the three returners, I think, on the roster there. I do wonder if maybe the approach with NiJaree will be to have her hit on games she doesn't pitch. That way, and keep that flexibility as an option and just have her focus hitting wise, maybe pitching wise, excuse me, on games that she is pitching. That's why I was caught off guard that she hit last on Friday night while she was pitching, because in that Nebraska game, that home run against Jordy, she didn't pitch in that game.
Yeah, and again, I didn't hit, so I didn't have to worry about it whatsoever. But a lot of people do say that, it's a lot sometimes to be pitching in a big game and hitting in a big game. And if you're not used to it, it's another level mentally and emotionally, I think, to keep everything in check. And don't get me wrong, I think NiJaree did a great job of it. Obviously, on the pitching side, was able to execute. No, she wants to execute better offensively, but it's something for Jerry and his staff to play around with. And I think too, at some points, if NiJaree feels like, hey, I need to just focus on pitching, I believe she's going to be able to go in and have that conversation with Jerry Glasgow. So we'll see, but I do think we'll still see her swing away and get her some good cuts and be able to be in the offensive lineup quite a bit for Tech.
What do you think of Jerry's team overall? Seeing him live in person, I think everybody's focused on NiJaree, rightfully so. I'm fascinated to know the team around her. I think the offense still is a work in progress. When and listening to him talk, I talked to him before the season. He's kind of said the same thing after Clearwater. What was your impression seeing him live so far?
Well, I mean, they're a Jerry Glasgow team. He goes and finds pieces and he brings them all together and then says, "Okay, let's put the puzzle together." And so that's what he's doing. He has an extremely athletic team. He's young and he will go with the young players to be able to get them experience as they grow. So that way, as his tenure goes on, his players are developing. But I think like he said early on too, is they're still working on the team chemistry piece. He's working on which lineup looks the best because he knows on paper what he thinks looks the best, but if it's not producing, he needs to tinker with it. And so he's doing that. And unfortunately last night, his starting lineup ended up changing literally right before game time, and Vic Valdez came out of the starting lineup, ended up pinch hitting late, but for whatever reason came out from behind the plate in the lineup altogether at the start of the game. And so he had to go into kind of an immediate switch and figure out what his lineup was going to look like. But he'll put the pieces together. I mean, they're athletic, but they're an offense. It's a Jerry Glasgow offense. They're not going to get cheated. They're going to take their swings. If they see a pitch they like, they're going to be aggressive, which makes them sometimes susceptible to stretching the zone. They're going to have to get better there, but they're young for the most part. But I think by April, May, that group is going to be putting up runs the way Jerry Glasgow expects them to.
Texas, they bring back the core from last year, but there are some missing pieces via graduation and then injury with Martinez out for the year. What's your thoughts on them, especially in the infield, with the big question being at shortstop? Good is right now playing at shortstop. They had Katie Bennett over at second base on Friday night. What's your thoughts on this team, especially in the infield with the Martinez loss?
I think they're going to be able to be fine in the infield, to be honest. Leanne Good has played shortstop before, high school, travel ball. She's played it at the elite level. It's just a matter of her being comfortable there again every day. And to be honest, she didn't get a ton of action in the game against Tech, but she did have a ball that she had to charge in on and make an on the road run, or excuse me, on the road run throw. Um, and she did it with ease. And that's something that if you're not comfortable there and it's the first ball you're really getting of the day, can make you hesitate. So I think she's settling in well there. And I know I benefited. I got to coach her. I've seen her be there. So she has the capability. So it's just a matter of every day her being able to deal with all the pressure and stress that comes with that position. Offense wise, I think Texas is just as good. You know, Bella Dayton graduated, but I think Katie Bennett eventually can probably fill those shoes. Alyssa Washington graduated, but with Good back in the lineup this year, I think she'll pick up offensively. The biggest thing is depth. Last year, we talked about how that was the deepest team Texas had ever had as far as being able to go to the bench for pinch hitters. Not so sure they have the depth this year. Still being young on the bench. They have a Dea Wallace who didn't get a ton of at bats, primarily pinch ran in 24. Lynn Brister, who's a freshman, so she's going to have to, learn the ropes a little bit, get some opportunities. And then Katie Simmons, who has been in and out of the lineup her entire career. Great teammate, great role player. She embraces her role, but she's primarily the only experienced bat they have on the bench to go to.
I feel like they're a team now, and talking to Coach White before the season, people forget they were so young last year. I know you knew that, but I think a lot of us have forgotten how young they were last year, and they went through a lot of things for the first time, including some of those postseason battles, the Classic against A&M in the Supers, and even that World Series experience for a lot of them was still brand new. I get a sense this year that confidence is paying off for the veterans. It's a battle-tested group. Do you sense that they're a much, I don't want to say more confident group, but they're definitely more battle-tested. They've been through this. So they know what they need to do to get wins, even if they're not at their best per se.
Well, you talk about it. They went to the World Series finals in 22, and then in 23 they lose to Tennessee, and that's when Vivi Martinez, Leanne Good, that crew were freshmen. So they learned, okay, we don't like the way this ended, but we got, some intense postseason experience in Tennessee at Supers. And then the next year in 24, they go to the World Series because that group was matured. And so now that group is juniors and they're really able to lead the charge. And you can see where Teagan Kavan and her freshman class with Katie Stewart, Caden Henry, I'm probably leaving a few out, but they got experience that the class above them didn't get at the World Series. And you can build on World Series experience and the expectation and the standard to get there. So now you have two classes of, yes, young athletes that got to see what that's like as a freshman and sophomore that are now juniors and sophomores. And it's going to pay dividends for Texas, I believe.
What's it like broadcasting a classic pitchers duel like that one on Friday night? We don't get that as many anymore like we used to because everybody's going the baseball philosophy. We got to take pitchers out and all that. I mean, I personally enjoy the old school there and the fact that both of them threw the whole game, and I don't think either coach even blinked at taking them out there. What was it like for you in the booth to call that?
It was really exciting. I would have to say that's probably like the second that would rank second in pitchers duels I've got to call. Right out of college, I actually got to call a Taryn Moet, Katie Burkhart one hit the entire game. I can't remember which way which, but one of them threw a no hitter, one of them threw a one hitter and lost 1-0. So, but it was fun. I think it's fun, especially as a pitcher, to sit and watch how they each execute their craft, go through an at bat and explain, how one pitch set up the next pitch, or even if a pitch gets hit, why that might have not been the best call. In my opinion, not, I'm not calling the pitches, but I can offer an opinion sometimes. But I really enjoyed it as a pitcher. It was fun to watch their craft. I am a more of a modern fan though, so don't get me wrong. I like the big hits and good base running and watching coaches decide when to wave runners and when not to. So offense still excites me as well. But yeah, deep down last night, that was an old school classic, and it was really fun to call.
And it was the game of the night. Like, Clearwater's the big tournament this weekend, and yet I felt like everybody was watching your game. You and Alex calling the game. That was the marquee game there. Do you put extra pressure on yourself when it's two marquee pitchers? Do you just call it the same as you would otherwise? Like, I mean, what's the approach like from your standpoint? Because Alex obviously set you up. I thought you two did a great job of analyzing both pitchers and what was working, but also at the same time what the hitters had to do to have a chance. So what's that like when you have two star pitchers like that going at it, as from a preparation standpoint and just as the broadcast is going?
I'm going to prepare the same way, regardless of who's in the circle. I want to know as much about every pitching staff as I can. And so anytime we interview coaches, I'm always asking in the circle, what do they throw? How hard do they throw? How do you use them? If you're going to do the staff approach, how do they, play off of somebody else? Those are things I want to know. And, both these pitchers, obviously, I get a great look at Teagan Kavan since I follow Texas all the time. But got to watch NiJaree, who's not watching NiJaree last year, right? And Texas played her 3 times, so got to see her plenty then last season too. And so I think just being a softball fan and watching pitchers, I knew a little bit more about how they throw already, so that the familiarity piece was a big piece. But at the same time, you want to give pitchers their due and the respect because they're trying to perfect a craft that is really hard to perfect. And so, I know that I've been in that circle. So I try to just talk and broadcast off of that place of knowing, having been in their place and watching them try to perfect their craft. And what's working is usually easy to tell, but how are they setting up what's working is the piece that I think the common fan doesn't often see.
The cliche is pitchers always say they don't worry about who they're facing pitching wise. They're worried about the hitters and they're all that job. But I got to believe that if you're Teagan, you know who you're facing, the opposite. That raises your game. Do you feed off each other's there? I mean, you've obviously had many battles with many great pitchers throughout your career. Certainly you and Monica jumps to mind, but there's been plenty others. Are you aware and you almost of the next pitcher? You have to know, hey, I got to be on my A+ game tonight just to have a shot to win. There is that any factors there?
It's a no. I mean, you get excited about having a matchup with an elite pitcher. You know that. As far as your game doesn't have to step up to A+ depending on what their offense is looking like. And so I think the big thing is let the emotions of the big matchup excite you and get you going and get you ready. And if you're passion driven, let it drive the passion. But at the same time, just remembering you still have to execute your game plan regardless. And there's times that even in an elite game, you might be able to get by with your B+ game as opposed to an A- game or whatever. So, but I think what Teagan did really well last night is she honestly, as much as she knew she was in an intense matchup, I don't think she was worried about what NiJaree was doing. She was worried about getting outs. And I know I saw a couple times in replays on social media that after she got the third out, she came in and I felt like I was kind of watching myself because she's like high-fiving her teammates, but she's like, let's go, like, let's get it going. And you just want that one run so you can keep doing your job and eventually get to the end of the game. So it was really cool to see because I really honestly don't think Teagan worried about what NiJaree was doing last night.
And you have to do it that way. But they both provided a lot of magic there. Do you think there's still room in the sport where we could get more of these pitchers duels instead of becoming a bullpen game? Where are you? And you mentioned it because you've obviously seen the sport evolve. I mean, I hope we see more of this. Is kind of my selfish opinion there. Maybe. Granted, I'm selfish on this.
I think the key is, and what you don't see as much nowadays with pitchers, and it's these two are an exception because when you say NiJaree Canady, you think rise ball. When you say Teagan Kavan, you think rise ball changeup. And so you have two pitchers who have perfected a pitch or a pitch or two, and then are using other pitches to play off of those. Where a lot of other pitchers, you say, what do they throw? And the coach is like, oh, she throws the all quadrant, she throws everything. You can't, very few can go into college with everything, and all of those are an elite level. So you have to have one or two pitches that are at an elite level in order to be able to dominate the way those two did last night. And I think that's where we're getting away from, and it starts way younger, is we're starting to teach pitchers 5 pitches as opposed to, hey, let's be really good at hitting spots and let's throw 2 pitches or 3 pitches. Everybody wants to have all 5. out the gate. And to be honest, so many college coaches will tell you they want a pitcher that has two or three really good pitches as opposed to somebody who has five average pitches. But I think it's going to come. Jordy Ball's another one. She can go elite up, elite down. I didn't get to see what Raylan Chafin's throwing right now, but I know the kid has a competitor mindset. So if Tara Mowat has gotten even one of her pitches at an elite level, she's going to be able to compete at a different level too. And, obviously she outlasted NiJaree in opening weekend for a win for Mississippi State. So I think there's a possibility, but then you go on the flip side and there's technology and scouting and so much information that can be shared for tendencies and whatnot. So as a pitching coach, you just have to be smart if your pitcher can throw different game plans or different schemes, multiple times.
And certainly there's the obviously the kind of keeping it pacing them throughout the season. Certainly in Texas case, they got a lot of depth in the arms, but I just hope we develop more pitchers that can, hey, if they have to, go the distance. Do you think we can get back to that development there? You mentioned that part of the issue is everybody's trying to get five pitches, 33. Do you think we can kind of fix that, or do you think this is just it's too late?
We'll ever get back to a majority of pitchers throwing complete games.
Right.
I think we'll get to a point here as pitchers start to see that like what makes each pitcher elite and dominant. Someone. So I think I think it's growing to where more are starting to try to emulate a NiJaree or a Teagan or a Raylan or a Jordy. But I don't know that we'll get there like back in the day where most people did, and now you're carrying only three or four again. I think the staff approach is not bad. One, to keep kids healthy, two, mentally to keep them in good places. But at the same time, I think it's just and it's good for our sport to have multiple pitchers on staff and more than when I say multiple, more than three. So that way you have options and you have matchups that you can play with because there's matchups that just play in favor of other people too.
All right, all right. I concede. I'll concede it. That's fine. But at least I get to enjoy you calling those games, and that's what's fun. You're calling Texas games this year with Alex Loeb. You're calling UTSA games. You're keeping yourself busy.
Well, my husband's the assistant men's golf coach at UTSA, and so when Van took over last year, she reached out and asked if I would call their games, and already was committed, obviously with Longhorn Network being in existence, and so I told her when I wasn't working there, I would, and enjoyed it and have enjoyed watching her try to turn that program around, and so yeah, any chance I can get, I'm going to be watching softball anyways, so why not talk about it?
That's been my approach for a while now. Well, I'm glad you're doing that. We'll get you back on later in the year to talk more. UTSA looks much improved there in the American. We're going to talk Big 12. We'll talk SEC. We got a lot to talk about later in the year, but I know you got a busy weekend ahead. But I had to get you on after that classic between Teagan and NiJaree, and I was very fitting that you got to call that game, and I'm glad you did. You and Alex Loeb. Thanks for doing this on short notice. I know the family is doing good. Keep it that way, and thanks for always coming on with us.
No problem. Thanks for having me, and hopefully we see a couple more pitchers duels as the season unfolds.
Amen.